All right, today we'll be talking about polynomials. Now, if you notice, this is an Algebra 1 topic. It's an Algebra 1 skill. I'm going to go ahead and get you prepared for next year by giving you a little introduction to polynomials. It sounds like a very complicated word, but it really is not. Polynomial comes from poly, which just means many, and nomial, which in this case means terms. So polynomial means many terms. A polynomial can have constants like the number 3, -20, or 1/2. It can have variables like x and y, z, a, b, any variables, and positive exponents like x to the second power, x to the fifth power. And all of these can be combined using addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division, except we cannot have division by a variable. So if it's dividing by x, it is not a polynomial. If it's dividing by a or a squared, it is not a polynomial. So here's some examples. Remember, it can have constants, variables, and exponents, but never division by a variable. So 5x is a polynomial. It has one term. 5x is the one term. -512v to the fifth plus 99w to the fifth. That is a polynomial with two terms. -512v to the fifth is the first one. 99w to the fifth is the second. X plus 2. It has two terms. One is x and one is 2. That's a variable and a constant. -6y squared minus 79x. The next one, 3xyz plus 3xy squared z minus 0.1xz minus 200y plus 0.5. That is a polynomial expression. It has 5 different terms, so each term is in between an addition or subtraction sign. Y is a polynomial. It has one term, 5, the number 5. That's a constant. It has one term. So all of those are polynomials. So that may lead you to ask, well, what is not a polynomial? So a polynomial is any expression with terms where the exponents are positive. So 3xy to the -2nd, any bad kids are not polynomials. The reason for that, if I actually simplified this, I would have 3x over y squared. Remember, I said you cannot divide by a variable. That would be dividing by a variable. So any variables in the denominator makes it not a polynomial. So look at this one. X is in the denominator. Not a polynomial. A negative exponent, not a polynomial. Any other expression is a polynomial. So what you will have to do with these polynomials, first you will have to be able to classify them. We classify them in a couple of different ways, okay? So you might want to get some paper and write this down. This first way we classify them is probably the easiest. So we classify it by the number of terms. If it has one term, we call it a monomial. Remember, mono means one anyway. So that's a monomial. It has one term. So 5x, 8x would be one term. Even the number 3, that's still one term. So it can be a number. It could just be x squared. That's one term. A binomial, okay, this is two terms, okay, like a bicycle has two wheels. So -8x and 3 are the two terms. And we'll either be adding or subtracting these terms. A trinomial, like a tricycle, has 3 terms. 5x squared is one, -8x is another, and +4 is the third one. Anything else, if it has more than 3, we just call it a polynomial. So this one has 4. It could have 20 terms, and we still call it a polynomial. So you need to remember, monomial has 1, binomial 2, trinomial 3, polynomial is any more. And sometimes they'll call these polynomials when they're not asking you to classify them. So polynomial is just the general name for it. We will also classify them by the degree, okay? This is probably the harder one. The degree is the highest exponent in a term. So if I look at this entire term here, okay, this is, this should be in an expression. If I look at this expression, I'm looking for one term that has the highest exponent. Well, that would be 3x to the 4th. So since this is the highest exponent, this has a degree of 4. Anytime I have an expression here, I'm just looking for the highest exponent. It may not always be the first one. Okay, it doesn't have to be first necessarily if it's not in standard form. So you're looking for the highest exponent. Now, terms with more than one variable, and these are rare, we will add the exponents. For example, this is all one term here. So I would add these. So this would be a degree of 7. This would only have a degree of 3 because remember there's 1 here. And this would have a degree of 1 because there's imaginary 1 there. So in this trinomial, because it has 3 terms, the degree would be 7 because that's the highest. And we will practice this in just a minute. We can also classify polynomials that have certain degrees. We give them specific names. So the number 3, it does not have a degree. That would have a degree of 0. So we just call that a constant. You already know that. If it has a degree of 1, we call that linear, okay? Like x plus 3 is linear. You should already have a connection with that because we have graphed linear functions. They have a degree of 1. Quadratic, remember those have a degree of 2 and they make that U shape. You've heard me say that, the parabola. We call that quadratic. So x squared plus 5 is a quadratic expression. Okay, this is really a quadratic binomial because it has 2 terms and the degree is 2. This is the most confusing one because we want to think quad is 4. But here, quad means 2. Okay, it really is Latin for the word square. And remember that's x squared. Okay, so x squared is quadratic. And you should know this one, x to the 3rd power is cubic and it has a degree of 3. So that's 3 different ways we will classify these. Typically, we combine them. For example, my first expression here, 3x plus 4. So we're looking for how many terms it has. Well, 3x is a term and 4 is a term, so it has 2 terms. The degree, remember I'm looking for the exponent. I'm looking for the highest exponent. Well, this has an exponent of 1. This has an exponent of 0, so 1 would be the highest. So now I name it. Okay, since my degree was 1, we call this linear. Since it has 2 terms, it's a linear binomial. This is what you will have to do. You will have to name these. It's a linear because it has a degree of 1, binomial because it has 2 terms. So this one has 1, 2, 3 terms. So I know already that's going to be a trinomial. And the degree, the highest one, this is 2, 1, 0. So the degree is 2. So look at this. We're going to call it here trinomial with a degree of 2. Well, degree of 2 tells me it's going to be quadratic. So this is a quadratic trinomial. And it's going to be a little bit confusing at first just because these are harder vocabulary words. But the process is not difficult. There's nothing you need to add or subtract or divide. So how many terms? 1, 2. So write 2 and go ahead and write that down. Okay, I know that's going to be a binomial. The degree, I'm looking at the exponent. Well, this has an exponent of 3, an exponent of 1. I'm picking the highest one. So it's going to have a degree of 3. I know that is going to be cubic. So then I write it down. This is a cubic binomial. Then make sure you're right. Cubic means x to the 3rd. Binomial means 2 terms. All right, the next one, how many terms? 1, 2 terms. So I know that's going to be a binomial again. We're looking at the degree here. This is to the 5th. This degree, you kind of have to look at it because if you're careful here, there's 1 there and 1 there. This would still have a degree of 5. There's no name for that. No name. So we just call this a binomial. If it doesn't have a degree of 0, 1, 2, or 3, a degree of 0, 1, 2, or 3, we don't have to have that extra name. We're just naming this by the terms. It's a binomial because it has 2 terms. The degree is too large to give it an actual name. All right, next. We have 22, so that's only 1 term. It has a degree of 0 because there's no variable here. So we just call this a constant. It's constant because of the degree of 0. And it's a monomial because it only has one term. Constant monomial. Number of terms, 2 terms, so I know that's going to be a binomial. Degree, a degree of -4. Remember, that is not a polynomial. We cannot have negative exponents. That would put that to the basement. It would be 5 over x to the 4th. We cannot divide by a variable. So that's not a polynomial at all. It does not get a name. We cannot call it a binomial because it's not a polynomial at all. It's completely out. Next one, terms, 2, 3, 4 terms. So it's not going to have a name. it's not going to have a specific name. I'm going to call this a polynomial. The degree, well, this has a degree of 5, 4, 3, 2, so I picked the highest, so it's a degree of 5. That doesn't have a specific name either, so no name. So we're just going to call this a polynomial. It has more than 3 terms. No specific name. Number of terms, 1, 2, 3 terms, so I know that's going to be a trinomial. The degree, I have 5, 1, and 0, so the highest is 5. No specific name there. I just call this a trinomial. And that is it. That's classifying polynomials. You're just looking at them. You're using your observation skills, and that's about it. So if you need to write these terms down, I would go to these slides right here, and I would write down 1 term, 2 terms, 3 terms, and more than 3. These are your vocabulary words right here, these 4. You need to know how to find the degree, and then you're going to need these 4 vocabulary terms, and you need to know what they mean. Remember, you can re-watch this video as many times as needed.